Welcome to this video, the purpose of which is to outline Coptic pronunciation, specifically the Old Bohairic Pronunciation System, as opposed to the Greco-Bohairic Pronunciation System. So this one's just slightly different, and the Old Bohairic Pronunciation System is slightly different to the Greco-Bohairic system in terms of how it pronounces a number of consonants, and indeed in some senses as to how some vowels are pronounced too, specifically diphthongs. So first of all, just a note about Coptic word stress. In Bohairic Coptic, word stress can fall on the ultimate, or the final syllable, or the penultimate, the second to last syllable. The letters ⲿ, o, or omega are always fully stressed, but however, the best way to know how to stress a Coptic word is to hear it pronounced aloud by someone. So we'll just begin with some Coptic consonants and basic vowels. So first of all, we have ⲿ, which is like the a in the English word father, something similar to that. A. Then we have ⲿ, which is like the W sound in the English word with, or sometimes a B sound, and I'll have more on that later in this video. Gamma is like the G in the English word gate. However, more accurately, it's more like a g sound as in Greek or modern Greek or Arabic. We then move on to the letter dalda, which is like the D in the English word dam, d. Then we have the letter a. This is like the first A in the English word about, a. So it's shorter than the represented by the letter alpha, It's just simply a very short A sound. We now move on to the sixth letter of the Coptic alphabet, so or so. As you can see, I have written non-applicable here, as this letter has no sound, or this has no sound as a letter. It is a symbol representing the number 6 in Coptic, which in its masculine form is pronounced so, as spelt here, or so in its feminine form. We then have the letter zada, which is like the Z in the English word zoo, z. We then have the letter ⲿ. This is like the A in the English word father, only doubled, or twice as long, so it's about twice as long as the A in alba. It's similar to the Arabic long vowel, we don't really have these exact distinctions in English. We may have the sounds, but we don't distinguish them by letter necessarily. We just use the letter A, or sometimes certain digraphs. However, just imagine in order of length from shortest to longest, being A being the shortest, alba being the middle, sort of longest, and ⲿ being the longest, sort of A sound. We then have the letter ⲱ. This is something like the T in ton. There's not really an exact or specific emphatic T in English. It's more accurately an Arabic emphatic t, or t, or t, as opposed to t would be unemphatic, but t would be emphatic. So ⲱ. It's not a sound we have in English, so it's not that easy to replicate it exactly correctly. Always to replicate it. It's not always easy to replicate it exactly correctly. We then have the letter ⲿ. This is like the E vowel sound in the English word be, e. It can also be the consonant Y, as in yes, yeah, when it comes before another vowel, such as in the spelling of the letter ⲿ. Some people debate to this day as to whether the ⲿ could have sometimes represented the sound in the English word be, e, which is what I simply choose to which is how I simply always choose to enunciate it personally. But it may, in some circumstances, have been pronounced like the as in the English word fish, the short I, but I'm not exactly sure, and I've looked to see what the rules for that would be. There doesn't seem to be a specific set of rules that Coptic speakers have used or written down in the past that I can find that says that the I would be pronounced in certain as in fish in these circumstances, or e as in bee in these circumstances. So personally, I just choose to use the e vowel uh, when pronouncing this letter yada within a Coptic word. Next, we have the letter gabwa. Gabwa. This is like the K sound in the English word kin. K, k. Simple K sound. Then we have lola. Lola. This is like the L sound in the English word light. L, l, l. Then we have the letter ma. Ma, ma. Like the M in the English word might. M, m. Next, we have the letter na, which is like the N in the English word next. N, n. Then we have the letter axi, axi. This is like the X or KS sound in the English word axe. Kissa, kissa. We then have the letter O, O. This is like the O in the English word top. So it's a short O, oh, oh. Or the English word mop, oh, oh. So it's a short O sound. We then have the Coptic letter B, B, B. This is like the B in the English word bat, or like the P in the English word pot. It's personal choice in this letter. So some people will choose to pronounce this letter as B, B, while others will pronounce it as P, 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 P. We then have the letter ro, ro, ro. This is like the R in the English word right, so it's an R sound. More accurately, it's a trilled R's in the Italian word arrivederci, arrivederci. So it's like a r, r, as you would hear in modern Arabic or in certain dialects of Hebrew. We then have the Coptic equivalent of the letter S, the letter sima, sima. This is like the S in the English word sent, so se, se. We then have the Coptic letter deb, deb. This is like the D in the English word doubt, d, d. However, sometimes, and I'll provide more information on this later in the video, it is a T, so a T in certain positions within a word. We then have the Coptic letter epsilon, epsilon. On its own, it is like the E in B, so Eve, E. However, when it's combined with the short letter O, O, it produces a W or W sound or a U or U sound. This is used to create diphthongs in Coptic. And it also is expressed specifically in the digraph OU, which I'll explain later in this video also. This next letter, the letter B, B, is also a letter with some choice in terms of its pronunciation. So it's like the B in bat, or it can be pronounced as f or as ph, or f as in f, as in the English word sulfur, f. Once again, it's personal choice. So some people will pronounce this letter as the letter B, B, and others will pronounce it as the letter phi, phi, which is more similar, of course, to its Greek counterpart. We then have the letter K, K, which is like the K in kind, K, or C in caravan, K, K. So it's just another way to write the letter K in the Old Bohairic Pronunciation System, K, K. Then we have the letter Absi, Absi. There's no English equivalent or direct English equivalent of this letter. It can be pronounced as bisse, bisse, or as pse, pse. Personally, I choose to pronounce it bisse, bisse, in keeping with how I pronounced the letter P earlier, or B, B. Like the Greek letter, when it's pronounced as PS, you can also think of it as being pronounced like the Greek letter, its Greek equivalent, Greek letter psi, psi, so pse. But personally, I choose to pronounce it as bese as opposed to pse. We then have the letter O or omega. This is like the O in the English word old, so O, O. It's about twice as long or double as the Coptic short O, so it's a long O in effect, not O, but O, O. We then have the first of the Coptic letters to be derived directly from the Demotic script, the letter shai, shai. This is like the SH or SH in the English word ship, sh, sh. We then have the letter phi, phi. This is like a letter this is like the F in the English word fight, so f, f. We then have the letter chai, chai. This is like the word loch, loch in English, which of course was borrowed from Scottish Gaelic. So we have chai, chai. It's like a ch, ch sort of sound. Next, we have the Coptic letter ⲿⲙ. This is like the H or H in the English word ⲿⲙ, ⲿⲙ, or the English word height, ⲿⲙ. We then have the Coptic letter ▼▼. This is like the ▼▼, the name of the Russian general Zhukov, ▼▼, or the S in the English measure, ▼▼, or can also be pronounced as the J in the French ▼▼. Then we have the letter ►. This is like the CH or CH in the English word church, ch. Uh, I've read that some Coptologists believe that this may have originally also been a sh sound. However, personally, I prefer the more common pronunciation that's given to it, the ch, to differentiate it from shy. So I pronounce it as the letter ch, the letter chama. We then have the letter d or da. It has two names. There's no direct English equivalent to this letter. It's pronounced as d, with a long e vowel for the letter I, d. We then have the final letter of the Coptic alphabet, sambi. You'll notice again I've written non-applicable here. This letter, this has no sound as a letter. It is a symbol representing the number 900, which of course is sambi in Coptic. I've entitled this next section Extra Pronunciation Rules for Coptic. So we start with the letter ⲿⲙ. So the letter ⲿ is always a W sound unless it comes at the end of a word or it is part of a consonant cluster in a final syllable. Then it is pronounced as b. When doubled, so when you have letter ⲿ, when you have the letter ⲿ twice, it is then pronounced, the first ⲿ is pronounced as a B and the second is pronounced as a W sound, as in the name for the Coptic letter K, kabwa. So here are some examples. We have the word waki, the Coptic word for city. Here the letter B, or wada, is B being the transliteration, of course, is pronounced as a W sound, a we. We then have the Coptic word dabbed, the Coptic word for fish. Here the letter B is pronounced as a B because it is part of a consonant cluster in a final syllable. It is clustered with the letter dab at the end, thus ending the word and being part of the final syllable. On this page we have a few more examples. So we have the word web. So here the first letter wada is a W, so we, and the second is a B, as a B sound, a b, as it comes at the end of the word, and this is the Coptic word meaning Kiev. So we have web. Then we have, as I mentioned earlier, the name for the Coptic letter K, kabwa. This is an example of doubling of the letter wada. The first wada is a B, and the second is a W sound, so kabwa. So moving on again to the letter gamma. This letter is usually pronounced as a g, as a G, sort of G sound, like an aspirated G in a way. In some other positions, or specifically when it is doubled, that is when there's a double gamma, it becomes a ⲿ sound in the Old Bohairic Pronunciation System. So we now move on to some examples for the letter gamma. We have gazobilakion. This is the Coptic word for treasury, which is obviously a borrowing from Greek. The G here is pronounced as a g or a g, so it's a standard sort of G sound. This is where things get slightly more complicated for the letter gamma. We have as an example word here provided angelos, an, so the first gamma being pronounced as an N sort of sound, j, second G, angelos. This is the Coptic word for messenger or angel, which of course is derived from Greek. Here the first G is pronounced as an N, and the second G is pronounced as a j sound, as in the letter janja, janja. So why do we have this changed pronunciation? Well, the letter gamma, gamma, before the letter gamma, or the letter axi, or the letter ga, or the letter gabwa, as we seen in the last page, produces unique pronunciations before these four letters when it's either doubled with two G's or when there's a G followed by one of the other three letters. This produces unique pronunciations. So G and G make n, j, n, j, n, j, n, j. So an N sound followed by a j. G and ks or X make n, ks, n, followed by ks, N followed by ks as in the X sound. G and k, the other way of writing the letter K in the Old Bohairic pronunciation system, make n, k, so N followed by K sound. Finally, G and K, as in G and Gabwa, make N and K also the same as the previous combination. So we get n, k, n, k. Why is this the case? Why doesn't the Greek sort of ing sound, as in our word sing, as I've written here, why isn't that retained? Well, simply because I believe Coptic originally didn't have or doesn't have the same ing or ng sound as the English word sing, which Greek uses when pronouncing the word angelos. The Greeks would pronounce it differently. They would have this ng sound, which we have in English. And with that in mind, in fact, I've decided just to explain on this page that the Coptic word angelos, is derived from the Greek word angelos, So like an ng sound for the first G there in Greek, angelos, which carries the same meaning of messenger or angel. It is pronounced differently, however, as angelos, which is quite different, as you can see, to the Old Bohairic pronunciation of the same word. So on this page, just mentioning again the letter ⲿ. Remember, this letter is pronounced as the consonant y or y when it comes before a vowel. Otherwise, it's pronounced as the e sound or long I sound, long I vowel sound in the English word be, e. Here we have some examples for the letter ⲿ. We have the Coptic word yot, yot. This is the Coptic word for father. Here the letter I is pronounced as a Y sound as it comes before a vowel. We have the Coptic word masi. This is the Coptic word for calf. Here the I is pronounced long. It's pronounced as a long E vowel, E, masi. The next letter is the Coptic letter deb. This letter is mostly pronounced as a D sound. However, when it comes at the end of a word, or it is part of a final consonant cluster, then it's pronounced as a T sound. T. Just a few more pronunciation examples we have here for the letter deb. So we have this first word, which is pronounced debana, debana. In this word, which meaning food, the T is pronounced as a D. So debana. In this next word, which is pronounced chet. In the Greek Bohairic pronunciation, people would probably pronounce this as heat. But I'll pronounce it as chet. This word meaning heart is pronounced. This word meaning heart has the letter deb pronounced as a T sound. So on this page, we have another example for the letter deb. We have the Coptic word, which we've already seen, I believe, the Coptic word deb. Debbed. In this word, meaning fish, the first T is pronounced as a D, so d, while the second T is pronounced as a T, as it's part of the final consonant cluster, which giving us the pronunciation of the word fish as debbed. So as we mentioned earlier, the letter epsilon, when it's on its own, this letter is simply like the E sound in the English word be. When combined with the short letter O, however, it forms a digraph that represents the sound W or W before a vowel, otherwise it's an U or U sound. So we just have a few examples of those rules for epsilon that we learned on the last page. This first word is pronounced braswidros, bras we de ros, braswidros, which is borrowed from the Greek presvyteros, uh, but in Coptic it's pronounced braswidros, bras we de ros, braswidros. This word meaning priest in Coptic has the letter U pronounced as a long E vowel because it's on its own. It's surrounded by two consonants, the letter ⲿ and the letter deb, and it's simply pronounced as an E. Then we have this O and epsilon digraph, the two letters combined that I described on the previous page, and this word here is pronounced as Y, as if it was WAI, Y, and this is the word. This word is the masculine version of the number one, and it has a W sound, so Y. This next example, the word uro, uro. This word meaning king is pronounced. This word meaning king has the U pronounced as in the English word foot. So U. So the digraph O epsilon here is pronounced as U, not W, U, because it's coming before a consonant and therefore simply representing a vowel sound. U, uro, meaning king. So we now move on to the final section, Coptic diphthongs and other vowel combinations. The first one we have is alba, epsilon. This is an ow sound, as in the English word cow. Ow. For example, or an example word is mau, meaning mother, and this is pronounced as mau. We then move on to the next diphthong, which is epsilon. This is an ew sound. An example word is eosudaria. This means salvation and is pronounced, I've sort of spelled it out just sort of phonetically here, eosudaria. The next one we move on to is oi. So this makes an oi sound as in English words oil and boy. For example, the Coptic word oik, oik means bread and is pronounced oik. Moving on from omega yoda, we then have alba yoda. Uh, this makes the I sound as an English word might, I. For an example Coptic word is ujai, which means health. It can also be used like the Italian ciao to mean both hello and goodbye. We then have a yoda. This is usually pronounced as a as an English word hey, a. For example, the Sahidic Coptic word ace, meaning lo or behold. The Bohairic version of that word is is with the same meaning, and actually raises an interesting question as to whether uh, a yoda was pronounced as e or a. I believe in the Greco-Bohairic pronunciation, it is generally pronounced as e in words of Greek origin, and in words of Egyptian origin, it could be pronounced as E or A. I'm not 100% sure on that one. Personally, I choose to pronounce it as A, as there's a complete, after all, lack of recordings of native Coptic speakers, as Arabic supplanted Coptic, I believe, in the 12th or 13th century AD. So there's no way to know exactly how all these words were pronounced. Sometimes we're simply working off reconstructions or comparative linguistics between, say, comparisons of Coptic and Egyptian Arabic or other Semitic languages, or Afroasiatic languages to the south, but personally I believe this was probably pronounced as spelt A. On this page we have o yada, the short O with yada. This is another way of writing the oi sound as in the English word oil. An example word is the word choice, which means master or lord without a definite article. If the definite article or the word the was there, referred to the Lord and as in our Lord, as in our Lord Jesus Christ. However, it's pronounced. This word is pronounced on its own without the article as choice. We have this particular combination, which is the letters yada, o, and epsilon, or eu, nearly like an eu sound. So this particular sound was pronounced as eu. An example Coptic word is siu, which means star, and it's pronounced as siu. So we now move on to these three combinations. We have ada epsilon, or then we have o epsilon, then we have omega o epsilon. So these three combinations are all pronounced as ow, as an English word cow, ow, just like the alba epsilon we saw earlier. I have no example words to show here as I was unable to find any when making this video. Doubtless I will hopefully come across some. But some believe there was a length distinction between the latter two. So between o epsilon and omega o epsilon, with the second one of them being slightly longer than the first, similar to how some people actually also believe that the oi diphthong, which was spelt either omega epsilon or omega yada or o yada, might have also had a similar distinction in length. It's impossible to know once again without recordings. However, I suppose the difference in spelling might suggest that. But it's impossible also to know if the Egyptians simply borrowed uh, the Greek alphabet and then decided to simply use both omega and o indiscriminately, to write simply the sound o or other sounds, etc. It's impossible to know exactly how they use them, and there are different theories. However, here for these three combinations, I think it's safest just to say they were pronounced ow, or something like that. We then have the combination yada ada. This was pronounced as a kind of yeah sound. So, for example, this Coptic word mia, so m, yeah, mia, meaning lioness, was pronounced as mia. Then we have this next word, which meant lamb. It was pronounced as hyeb, so like hye, so like an H or H followed by a Y sound, and then hyeb, which meant lamb and was pronounced as hyeb. The next two set of combinations we have are yada, and ada o epsilon, o epsilon. So the first combination here is pronounced as as in the English word ray. So a. An example word for the first combination is ray, which was a kind of fish, possibly the Mormyrus fish, which is a type of ray fish, I believe, that lives in the Nile. So the second combination here was pronounced as ow. An example word is the Coptic word ni as now, which means the brothers, and it's pronounced ni as now, and that of course contrasts to the previous page where the shorter diphthong or vowel combination, the yada was pronounced as a. This is pronounced as o. So we have nias now, o, nias now, o. This final example I have is sort of an example of, say, a consonant, in this case, ka, followed by the digraph O epsilon, and then followed by a vowel after that. So this Coptic word here, which means holy or pure, is pronounced as queb, queb, with the first letter K sound as a K, first letter as a K sound, and the second two letters, the digraph, functioning as a digraph producing a W sound. So we don't have K, U, A, we have queb, so a sort of qu sound, qu, as an English word quick, queb, queb. I'll just show this as an example, just to show you that if you have that sort of combination with the consonant followed by this digraph and then a vowel, it's a qu sound as opposed to a k, u, ab sound. So quab, quab. Finally, it simply remains for me to say thank you for watching as always, and hopefully this will be a useful resource to peruse from time to time, just to remind yourself of the nuances of Coptic or different pronunciation. It's exhaustive as it can be, but doubtless something will be left out. I couldn't find any examples for those ow diphthongs in some instances. Doubtless I'll hopefully come across those as time passes, but I maybe put them in the description if I can. But hopefully this has given you a reasonably comprehensive guide or guide to Coptic pronunciation and given you a rough idea as to how you say Coptic words would have been pronounced.